SJ, welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ Stongo, Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkidos, Mvskoke Radio, Mabu Hedjidowedjkis. Welcome to our program this week, and I hope that you will forgive me for being a little touch hoarse here. Weird weather does that to me for some reason, even though I wear a scarf and try to look pretty cool. We have a couple of things to share in our show today. First of all, we'll be speaking with Matthew Morgan, who's head of the Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association, about the situation involving the tribes, Governor Kevin Stitt, and the apparent impasse over the renewal of gaming compacts, which kind of keep things legal as far as tribal gaming goes. And in our second segment, we'll be speaking with folks who are looking at a cultural preservation project that will be focusing on Indian churches, Mvskoke churches in particular. But we will be getting to that around halfway. But first of all, let me get this segment going, and we'll find out what's going on with the state. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. Are you with us, sir?
Good morning.
I'm telling our listeners I'm just a touch hoarse today, so I may have to force a comment or two. First of all, let me get a quick capsule of who you are, what your mission is, and the Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association.
Sure. My name is Matthew Morgan. I serve as the chairman of the Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association. The OIGA supports tribal governmental gaming here within the state of Oklahoma. We represent both the tribal governments and also have associate members of private businesses that participate through contracts or other support efforts of tribal governmental gaming in the state. And so what we do is we provide education, we provide training, and we facilitate conversations to highlight the great work of the tribal governmental gaming industry within the tribal communities here in the state and the good it does around the state. So that's kind of what we do here at OIGA.
Does the word lobbying fit in there somewhere?
No, not really, because we do not work within the confines of the Capitol. We go to the Capitol when we're invited to update legislators or other elected officials on particular issues, but we do not actively participate in any discussions where we are nonpartisan, and we do not actually go there and do anything that would promote one bill or the other. When they have a proposed legislation, sometimes we get calls and say, how does this affect your industry? And we will give them that, or they'll ask for updates on what we're doing. And we always very inclusive and try to invite policymakers into whether it's our general meetings or especially during our annual conference and trade show so they can learn more about our industry.
How many tribes are members?
So currently we have 28 members, but again, our membership renews January 1st. So, depending on where people are at within their budgetary cycles, some tribes pay differently depending on what their fiscal year runs. And so we usually run 28 to 30, 31 throughout the year of member tribes, and then we have multiple different associate members that also qualify for membership through the OIGA.
So you serve as a voice for Native tribal governments involved in gaming, but not necessarily the voice, right?
Well, that's correct. The voices, those are the bosses, those are the tribal leaders, those are the people with the boots on the ground that actually, operate those facilities. That's who we try to work with, and we try to assist those in their efforts. But yeah, that's all we are. We provide assistance, and we try to provide, like I say, a voice to them, some education, try to be a source of information, and and here lately, what we've been doing is we've been facilitating a lot of conversations to ensure that everybody is is well-informed and feels like they have a voice in this process.
A lot of those conversations have focused around the words compact and contract. And let's take a moment there, and perhaps you could tell us what the difference is.
Sure, that's not a problem. I mean, a lot of people, you refer to contracts because contracts are what we deal with as individuals or we deal with as one private business to another. We enter into contracts. Tribal governments enter into contracts when they're procuring services. So everybody understands the general meaning of the word a contract, a legal document. The import of the word compact denotes a government-to-government agreement between two sovereigns. It denotes something of more important than just a general contract. These are governments memorializing some agreement to paper, and they're to each other, and they're recognizing each other's sovereignty. And so you see compacts that we have with the state of Oklahoma through a variety of different subjects, just not gaming, but that's what they denote. They denote that government element of those agreements are not merely contracts, but rise above that.
Now, when I hear your explanation and things, what comes to my mind is it's pretty much equivalent to the treaties. Recognition between two forms of government. Would you say that was accurate?
Yeah. I think at different times, if it was a different time and place, that's exactly what we'd have had in place. We'd have had a treaty. So I would agree with that assessment.
All right. Now, getting back to the phrase compacts, of course, we passed a January 1 deadline when these things were supposed to be resolved and people get on with it. But right now, the members of your organization and other tribal governments are butting heads with Governor Kevin Stitt. He says the compacts have to be renegotiated, and the tribal stance has always has been they renew automatically. Now, let's take those terms here. First of all, the fact that the contention that the tribes and the compacts just renew automatically. Now, could you focus on that for a second?
Sure, we can talk about that. So when we're talking about these terms, really what we're talking about within the Tribal State Model Compact, that's the base document that each tribe went in and signed. There's a particular paragraph and part in there, and we're really talking about Part 15B of that document, and that's where the disagreement has, I guess, sprang forth. And it is it's an involved sentence. Don't get me wrong. It is an involved sentence, but as I've listened to people that were around the table and crafting those, what stands out as important to us is that the compact never just self-actualized and renewed on its own. What the compact says in Part 15B is that the compact shall have a term which will expire on January 1, 2020, and at that time, if organizational licensees or others are authorized to conduct electronic gaming in any form other than pari-mutuel wagering on live horse racing pursuant to any governmental action of the state or court order following the effective date of this compact, the compact shall automatically renew for successive additional 15-year terms. So that's the first part of that paragraph that we're always talking about, that something had to trigger that automatic renewal. And we believe that the state met its burden to automatically trigger the automatic renewal through a variety of different things. Governor Stitt, on the other hand, believes that sentence stops at the first comma, and it says it shall terminate on. We believe the second part of that sentence is of the utmost importance and believe the triggers have been met, and that's where the rub of this has came in, because under the terms of our compact, the rest of that paragraph goes on. It allows either party within 180 days of that January 1st date to propose to renegotiate Parts 11E. Now, Parts 11A and E talk about the rates that we pay, and the exclusivity. So it allows the parties to come in and talk about those two subjects and try to figure out why this compact continues. Is there some adjustment there that both sides could agree upon? And we've always been very clear on our stance from tribal leaders' perspective of the compact is auto-renewed, and if that was acknowledged, that we would sit down and talk about rates and exclusivities per our compact. But that hasn't happened yet, and that's where we've always been in disagreement. The conversation. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me jump in that right now.
Yeah.
Anywhere in that language, is there any reference to the compacts expiring or being required to be renewed?
No, there's no requirement of renewal. It was triggers that had to be met. There's also another provision within our compact that allows both parties to agree. Both parties agree to terminate the compact. There were a couple of other provisions that were put in that would allow the state to unilaterally stop our compacts, but they all surrounded the tobacco compacts and whether tribes were in compliance with that tobacco compact when it was drafted, when it was submitted to tribes. But when those provisions went up to the Secretary of the Interior for federal approval, they felt like those terms were outside the bounds of IGRA, and they struck those provisions. And the agreement does allow you to severable any provisions that the Secretary didn't agree upon. So those types of unilateral termination were taken out prior to this even starting by the federal government, which left us with either the parties both mutually agreeing to terminate the agreement, or the state meeting some of those triggers in order for it to renew. If they did not meet those triggers, it would have expired on the 1st of January.
All right. Now, let me drop back into history here just a little bit. These compacts between the tribal governments and state governments are required to make gaming, this sort of gaming, legal, right?
Correct, under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act.
Right. Now, that I'm glad you mentioned that law, because it's required across the nation. It's not just here in Oklahoma. Whether it's Lakota at Prior Lake, Minnesota, making a fortune out there, or a smaller tribe somewhere else, perhaps near the Kansas border here in Oklahoma. But both, all such enterprises are required to have these agreements in place, correct?
Correct. That is a federal statute that is applicable across the country in terms of tribal governments being able to enter into compacts in order to allow them to play Class 3 type gamings. You have to have an agreement with the state government for Class 3 type games.
Now, when we say Class 3, we're talking about dice and roulette and things like that?
Correct. That would be casino style gaming. So we're talking about our slot machines that are electronic games. You're talking about card games, roulette, craps, those type of games. Okay.
Well, the impasse where push comes to shove is, of course, over the renewal, and I'm curious about your perspective on what motivated Governor Stitt to pursue this sort of thing. He was, I believe, quoted in a couple of news sources as saying other states, tribes kick in more to their local state government, and Oklahoma needs to step up to the plate and kick in even more. First off, at the top of my head, and I guess my heart, is that, is somebody getting a little greedy here? What's going on? And then I thought, well, is the amount of money coming from those tribal casinos in other states match what Oklahoma tribes are doing? Those are a couple of question marks in my mind. So can you address those two ideas?
Sure. So on the first part, dealing with motivations, I try not to get into what motivates other folks. I don't find that as useful. I don't know why Governor Stitt chose this path. I just know that we're dealing with the outcome of his, of him doing that, and which was unfortunate, both in terms of what he did and how he did it. And I will say, I think tribal leaders always expected the state of Oklahoma to come back and say we'd like to renegotiate the rates that you pay, because when this compact was entered into in 2004, nobody was sure of exactly what the ultimate benefit to tribes and to the state would be. In fact, you've seen those early estimates kicked around of like $70 million that the state estimated. They thought that both the lottery and tribal gaming would eventually bring in on an annual basis to the state coffers. Just by way, so your listeners understand, last year we almost brought in $150 million from the tribes alone. So we've well exceeded those estimates, and that was the reason I think tribes expected the state to come back and say, hey, we'd like to renegotiate some rates. And tribal leaders were prepared and continue to be prepared to have that conversation. But to your question on what is the impact, and that's what I think people really see. I mean, it's all great to talk about rates and all this other things, but true impacts when you're looking at dollars coming in. Over the term of this compact, tribal governments have paid in exclusivity fees a little over $1.5 billion into the state coffers. That's in return for the substantial exclusivity. And keep in mind that tribes paid an initial $50,000 fee in order to allow the state to gear up under the compact for its oversight duties. And then annually, we pay in $35,000 oversight fee per tribe to the state. That's over $1 million a year to allow them to not appropriate state tax dollars for performing their oversight duties under our compact. So we pay for those as tribes operate. That state doesn't pay, taxpayers don't pay, tribes pay that money. But in terms of real dollars that come to the state, tribal gaming in Oklahoma is the third largest by revenue gaming jurisdiction in the United States. Nevada's first, California's second, Oklahoma's third. If we're talking about tribal gaming, California's first in overall terms of dollars it makes. Oklahoma's number two. And if you talk about it on a per capita, meaning if you look at our number of our citizens versus what Californians or Nevadans or any other state citizens receive per person, Oklahoma receives the most money per person by the money generated through our exclusivity fees. And that's because, we have so many tribes. We have a lot of operations. We're a very small population state if you look at us in terms of other states. And so, in layman's term, we get a lot of bang for our buck here in Oklahoma from a state perspective of the dollars coming in, and they outlay no money in order to perform their oversight duties. So I think that's a really good deal, and that's something that we've asked the state, if you want to talk about rates, let's talk about that as well. And then you also need to talk about all the other things that tribal governments do in order to assist not only their citizens, but its local community partners as well in ensuring that everybody's lives are improved around them.
Okay, let me come back to that in just a second. One more question on the amount of bucks. Let's just be real plain about it. The number, the amounts that Oklahoma tribes then send to our state government here, does that, we're third, you say, but how close? I mean, is there some comparisons that have ever been made? Like, does California send in $250 million? Right?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but I would encourage you or your listeners to go to oiga.org, where we have a lot of those numbers on our site. I did jot down some other numbers just in terms, because I think that's really what people want to know is, what does it mean to me? How does that help me out? So in 2015's last time the OIGA did any type of surveying of its members to look at just what does gaming operations do, we paid out $105 billion in annual wages, salaries in 2015. I mean, that's real dollars going out to employees in rural Oklahoma that they can spend and turn over. 1.5, $320 million of employee benefits. So healthcare, dental, life insurance, retirement plans in 2015, almost $320 million went into that. So it's good paying jobs with benefits in areas of our state that are not enjoying the economic boom that maybe some of the more urban areas have in this state in the past, where tribes are serving as that economic drivers. And that means real dollars in people's pockets where they can stay in those areas, get a good job, and continue to live and work. And we're not having this flight out from these areas. And that's so important to the economy of not only tribal governments, but to the state of Oklahoma as well.
Well, those benefits, then, that's on top of the amounts that bucks money that Doknawa that the tribes pay to the state. So you've got that pot of money, and then you've got people going to work, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. When we, I don't know if you looked at, saw the Native Oklahoma Impact Study that was released just July, and I referenced that study because it's the most recent one that looked at the total impact of tribal governments, just not gaming, but across the board, everything tribal governments do, in terms of employment. And I'm going to use employment because, we start talking about economic impact and indirect and direct impact, and it gets real fuzzy, and people don't follow that as well sometimes. But what really drives it home for them is that tribal governments are responsible for almost 96,000 jobs in this state. 96,000 jobs. That should speak volumes to folks that without the tribes here in the state, those jobs would not be available. And those jobs are done without any economic incentives from the state. When you see these big private corporations move in, you see the state coming and, rebating taxes. You see them giving lands. You see them, rebating, some other fees that help them with the cost of moving here and providing, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 100 jobs. They get economic incentives for that. Tribes don't. That's us doing things as good community partners. 96,000 jobs are responsible are here in Oklahoma because of the tribes, and that should speak volumes.
All right, now let's shift to the issues now that we're facing. Stitt has dug his heels in. The tribes we saw in a press conference not too long ago, over 30 of them banded together and said no way, and expressed their solidarity. So we've got the two sides now that are just being real hard-edged about this situation. The Mvskoke Creek Nation just, of course, joined a lawsuit against the governor. In the time we've been watching this, we've seen the Oklahoma Attorney General pull out of this fight, say, no, maybe I won't. You can go some other way. And even his Secretary of Native Liaison, Lisa Billy, resigned and said, no, we told you it's not a good idea, but you did it anyway, and I can't work for you. Bless her heart. Now we've got, I guess, a situation here where both sides have squared off. How would you describe what we've got now, and where do we go?
Sure. One of the outcomes of the path Governor Stitt set us on was that tribal governments are very sensitive to the products because we're in the entertainment business in terms of our gaming industry, and as we saw with the multiple press conference that Governor Stitt had, and he kept using this word uncertainty, and so tribal governments started receiving calls from patrons trying to understand this and getting nervous of whether they could continue to come to our facilities. We had local and regional vendors that we do business with, trying to call and getting nervous and saying, what, I'm trying to understand this, or is it going to be okay? Is it not going to be okay? It got to the point of the governor standing up there and using this term uncertainty that tribes had to move to protect their interest in this matter. So instead of continuing to participate in this PR efforts back and forth through jockeying of press conferences, 5 tribes, and 3 initially filed it, 2 now have asked to intervene, decided to ask a federal court on a very narrow subject, and that is whether the compacts have renewed or not. And that is to make sure that, this issue is settled once and for all by a court of jurisdiction, It doesn't go into rates discussion. It doesn't do anything beyond just asking whether or not the compacts have renewed under the terms of our agreement. Once the court comes back with its decision, we should know one way or the other. That question should be settled. And then if there's other things that we need to talk about, if there's other items between tribal governments and states in terms of our agreement, we can move on to those conversations in ways that everybody understands what the landscape is, and there's no fear tactics being thrown about. Our customers can continue to come and enjoy our facilities. Our vendors can be confident that we're going to continue to meet our obligations under our contracts with them as well, and we can move on. So that's where we're currently at right now. The questions before the Western District of Oklahoma, it's a federal court. They have that narrow question from them. The 3 tribes that filed that have briefed that and made that complaint. The governor, in his official capacity, has replied and provided his answer, and so now we're on a track with the courts to they'll set it through a scheduling order to figure out exactly what the dates look like and when the judge thinks he can have all information. We don't foresee on the tribal side the need for a lot of discovery here because it's such a narrow question. It's very much a question of law, question of fact that doesn't require a lot of discovery, and we feel confident in our position that the judge is going to come back and confirm that the compact has indeed auto-renewed. Now,
have you got any indication as to when that trial and decision may be coming down?
No, I don't. I'm like everybody else. We'll wait after the judge meets with both parties and writes that scheduling, and then we'll have a better sense of what that may look like. But we're all at the mercy of the court at this point.
A couple of things have been developing as this set of differences have come to the surface. United Tribes of Oklahoma, is that the correct name for that particular group, have been funding some what appear to be some very expensive commercials with some high-profile Oklahoma names in them, like football coaches and heads of chambers of commerce and other notables like that. That's quite a heavy-duty campaign. Is that something that your group has to deal with, or do you see what they're doing? Agree, disagree? What do you think?
So that campaign is called United for Oklahoma. UnitedForOklahoma.com is the website. OIGA does participate in that effort along with other tribes. And I will tell you that the conversation came about actually a couple of years ago, where we've talked about more of a global perspective on everything tribes do in this state. And so this idea had been in the works for a while to try, I don't know, maybe you're familiar, maybe your listeners are, of individual tribes that have done more public outreach to ensure that the general public understands everything that tribes do in the local community through their partnerships, or whether they just do it on their own. Because what we've heard a lot over the years is there's a great misunderstanding from the general public in what tribes do. They see projects or they hear of efforts and they know they get done, but they're not for sure how they got done. And so there was this effort on undergoing for a couple of years of tribes trying to figure out how do we present that message in a way that highlights some of these benefits but doesn't come across as bragging about things. And the United for Oklahoma campaign was accelerated because Governor Stitt came out on July 8th with this op-ed with what we felt like was misinformation, and then to ensure that the correct information was out there and that we highlighted the efforts that tribes do across all these different facets. And so the people you see on those commercials, what took place was our group asking our partners that we have long partnerships with on our efforts, would you be willing to go on camera and talk about that relationship? And that was the simple question. And all those people agreed, yes, I'd love to come on camera and talk about my individual story with tribes and what we've seen come out of those partnerships.
Right, you've got some heavy hitters there.
Yeah, we got people all across the state because that's where tribes are located. We're located all across the state, and we participate in lots of different efforts. Urban, rural, southwest, northwest, northeast, southwest. We participate in communities where we are and where our citizens live, and so we're very much ingrained throughout the communities of Oklahoma.
Let me ask you to speculate just a little bit here now. Just in case the decision goes against the tribe and say, well, we've got to renegotiate according to law, and Governor Stitt's looking for more money. Let's just make that one real plain. What are your member tribes prepared to do? Would they come back with another legal weapon, or would they just sit down and say, okay, how much more do you want? What do you think?
Well, I move at the direction of tribal leaders, so I'd hate to speculate and tell you where they're going, but what I can tell you is that throughout this process, tribal leaders have continued to meet. I know you referenced earlier in our conversation the meeting that took place at River Spirit where there was a press conference, and there were 32 tribes in the room that day, with a couple more being supportive but not able to be in attendance. But they've continued to meet through this process, and they continue to have discussions, and they continue to ask themselves these questions and work together to see, what may be available to them, whatever the outcome of the case may be, knowing that they feel very confident in what the outcome is going to be, but also realizing, it's up to a court to decide that. And so I think that, at the end of the day, what I can tell you is I think that tribal leaders are very reasonable partners. They understand the benefits that flow into their local citizens, impact the communities, and they become ingrained. I mean, we've lived here alongside and with Oklahoma for a long time. We understand that partnership, especially at the local level. I think you'd find very reasonable partners there of sitting down and saying, okay, how can we continue to enjoy this activity, but also understanding what those market conditions may be. Because that's the other part when Governor Stitt gets across renewal and wants to go straight to rates. I don't think he understands the market conditions that make up how you would come up with a fee that fits the market. He looks at rates through other states and just touts off the largest ones he sees. But, markets matter. As someone that county agree and someone that comes from the Republican Party, I think that he should understand that more than most. Markets matter. We don't pay the same taxes in Oklahoma that other people pay in the state. We don't pay the same amount for a gallon of gasoline because markets matter. And so, I think as long as people are reasonable about that, I think we can come to an agreement. The other part of that is it's just not the governor.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, we're going to have to wrap this up, but is there a final thought you'd like to leave with our listeners here?
Sure. I would say this. What we're having here, a disagreement with Governor Stitt, does not reflect the tribal-state relationship that we have with all of our elected state officials in Oklahoma. We understand, we appreciate, and we're glad to be a part of that conversation, and we will continue to be a part of that conversation. We will work through this issue, and know that we look to as tribes, being partners with the state, and we like to be partners with the state, but we will not be bullied into a position that hurts our economics and ultimately would hurt our programs and services to our citizens.
Very strong words, sir. Thank you much for taking some time to talk with me. We're going to be watching this issue for a while now, and don't be too surprised if you get another call from me asking for some more of your time, sir.
Of course. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate you being engaged in this conversation.
All right. Matthew Morgan, who is head of the Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association. We're going to take a short pause here, and then we'll be back and talk about some cultural preservation. So please stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio.
Hear that, hear that, hear that, hear that, hear that. That's the sound of Hope being killed by meth. Methamphetamine use is causing huge problems in our community. Hear that? That's the sound of something you can do about it. Events like rodeo, res ball, and family time can help keep kids away from meth.
Talk to your kids. Keep our culture alive. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Learn more at ncai.org.
Who am I? Am I Native? I don't want people assuming things because I'm Indian. I just want to be me. But how do I live in two worlds? Some guys just check out by doing meth. But that ain't for me. Because I see my family, my friends, my drum making, my future. There are a lot of cool things about being who I am. And meth isn't one of them.
Learn more at ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Welcome back to Mvskoke Radio here on The Brew. Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkados. Joining us in the studio now are a couple of folks who are looking at preserving an important part of Mvskoke culture and history. We have, where are we here? Whoops, my notes have disappeared. Ann Edwards, who is coordinating a project here, and Mr. M. Spain from our NAGRA program. Welcome, folks. We appreciate you making time for us and coming in today. Now, we want to know what this project is. It sounds pretty intriguing. Ann, you want to kind of give us an idea of what you're working on?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us on the radio this morning. Appreciate the time that you're giving us. What I am doing is, along with my position at Historic and Cultural Preservation, I am also a student at the College of the Mvskoke Nation, and I'm working on my service learning project to complete that program over there. And so we have sat down and put together a survey, and we're wanting to gather more information on our historic churches in our nation. And we realized that we have new churches that have come into our nation. We have churches that have been here for a long time, and so we are wanting to gather more information on the history of the churches, and to document that, for the posterity of our nation. We think it's important to document all sacred and cultural sites. And M. Spain is here with me today because he started this project when he first started working with the nation, and I think he said back in 2005. And so this is something I'm picking up where he left off, and hoping to get this information out there, get as much information documented as we can in order to create sort of a mechanism to recognizing our churches and to honoring our churches. We want to celebrate with them when they make their milestones. And, we've had a couple of that have already celebrated their 100th anniversary, and we like to be able to put something into place that that honors and recognizes the churches.
Okay, Mr. Spain, your name was mentioned at the beginning of this effort. What kinds of things are you focusing on? What's your mission?
When I first started here with the Mvskoke Creek Nation, one of my first jobs was to go out and basically collect information on cultural sites that are important to the Mvskoke people. For protection and preservation of sites such as churches, ceremonial grounds, cemeteries. One of our mandates in cultural preservation is to protect these sites, and so going out and documenting them. And I did a lot on the churches. Went out and documented. I think there was 82 old historical Indian churches here in the Mvskoke Nation.
82?
I think I have a list of 82.
Wow.
Yes, and that. I know there's more, but they're more of the newer churches that were probably formed here recently, mm-hmm. and probably mixed congregations. Mm-hmm. The ones I document are basically the old Indian churches, historical Indian churches that still worship the way we used to, you know, with the camp houses and the language and the system of separation of the sexes in the church, and those types of churches. So and trying to find out which ones actually had their cemeteries so we could help protect those.
Right.
We protect them from encroachment, whether it's livestock running free or projects, oil, gas industry. I know it's impacted a lot of them, a lot of cemeteries that they weren't aware were there. And today my job is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act coordinator. I work with NAGPRA to basically protect and rebury a lot of our ancestral remains in Southeast and maybe here if possible. But
Right now, NAGPRA is the federal law that gives you the muscle and the teeth there to go in and protect a site or help develop it or whatever you choose.
No, we don't develop the sites. It gives us the right to repatriate and rebury human remains that were excavated maybe a long time ago by archaeologists and projects where the burial may have to be removed or something. It gives us the right to repatriate human remains, funerary objects, objects of cultural patrimony, sacred objects. So it's a process that we go through. It's a federal process and sometimes it can be a lengthy process. But all federal agencies and anybody who uses federal money has to comply with these, or if they have to have a federal permit.
Right. Now, the discovery of something like that can actually stop a project in its tracks. If somebody's been digging and all of a sudden they come up with some bones or something like that, they have to stop and alert the federal people in the tribe. Is that kind of what it helps us?
Yes, if it's on federal land.
Right.
Federal land managers or if they use federal money. And it's not only that. There's just hundreds of thousands of human remains that are stored in places of higher education, colleges, universities that have anthropology departments and those types of things. A lot of them are at police departments and federal institutions that have basically gained them by arresting looters. And especially in the Southeast, there's a big problem with looters. People go out and dig up our ancestral graves and they don't care about the remains. They just scatter remains and things, which is sad, but all they're after is the pots and artifacts.
They go out and sell them.
Yes,
like that.
Big money on the black market, and it's a big problem in the Southeast. Not so much here, but
thank gosh.
Yes, and it could be, but anyway, that's my job. I go through a national database and look at artifacts. I mean, not artifacts, but look at items that need to be repatriated, whether they're artifacts or human remains, and we pursue those. And as I said, it can be a lengthy process to get those back for reburial. And what we do, we try to rebury them as close as possible back to where they came from.
Yeah. Hickory ground comes to mind in Alabama.
Yes.
But that's a different story.
Yes.
Now, tell me about the challenge here of gaining this information on Indian churches. I presume there were some that kind of came over on the Trail of Tears. People maintained that, and then, as Emma said, other churches kind of sprung up out of that.
Yeah, I think that we're hoping to learn more about that history by gathering this information, how long the church has been in the territory, if they came over, if some of the missionaries came over on the Trail of Tears. We want to document that and make it record. It's important to document our history. They say that a nation that doesn't know its history then really has no future, and so it's our job to document this history and to put it out there as information for everybody to learn and to have knowledge of. But our churches have long been an important part of our tribe, and that's why we want to document their existence. Like we said, their milestones, whether they have cemeteries or not. Sometimes the churches have moved into more modern directions, so they don't participate in some of the more, I would say, older traditions that the church would participate in, such as maybe baptizing in a lake or a river, or what the significance is of facing the east. The east is a direction that's important in both ceremonial and church. And so we want to get everybody's opinions and what they were taught and document that.
Now, when you contact a source, someone who's got this kind of information, what kind of questions do you ask? What data, so to speak, are you looking for there specifically?
Well, we want to know all of their church information, of course, and their finding directions, how to get to the church. We want to see if we can get a list of the names of all their current deacons and women's leaders or any leadership position within the church. If they have a history of it, who was their first pastor, those kinds of things. If they had an important government official or significant citizen that attended that church, we want to document that. We want to know if they have pictures that they're willing to share that we can scan and make a copy of, and of course return to them, but to document those pictures that they have as part of their history. We've also brought on board in our Historic and Cultural Preservation Department an oral historian. Her name is Midge Dillinger, and she's going to be working with me on trying to document the oral history of the churches as well, and the stories that they have that can be told and that we can document and pass down for future generations.
Now, are you concentrating primarily on Mvskoke churches?
Yes, we are.
Interdenominational kind of thing?
Well, and that's kind of something that we're wanting to document too, because some of our churches have gone interdenominational. Some of our churches are now mixed group. Not all Mvskoke citizens, all races are welcome to come to those churches.
Sure.
We've had new churches come in to the nation that are more modern. We still have some of the traditional churches who celebrate, like the Fourth Sunday. We want to know what the significance of that is to the church and how it began or how that history started with the celebration of Fourth Sunday. Let
me ask you this: how about some of the kind of traditional protocol, if you will? Where does that fit in? Now, I'm talking about, and of course, like the ringing of the bell. You get your first bell, and then the second, and separation of sexes, the placement of a bench, perhaps at the head of the congregation, things like that.
Yeah, those are all questions that we want to know what has been taught over. I can remember being a child, and of course, the church my grandparents attended was Trenton down in Hannah, and the bench was put out. At the time, there was an invitation offered, but back then I was so little. Like the preacher, the first preacher of that church that I remember was Frank Billy, and he preached in complete Mvskoke language, and all the hymns were sung in the Mvskoke language. And although I didn't understand, it was very meaningful. It spoke to my heart, and I grew up around that atmosphere. And so we want to learn more about the significance of those traditions and how they've evolved over time. And of course, the men did sit on one side and the women sat on the other, and children usually sat to the back, or they were in and out playing.
My parents didn't let me do that. I was always fidgeting.
Yeah. And so in singing the Creek hymns, we want to know about the baptisms. If the church has a baptismal on site now, because some churches do, they have become more modern, and it's a good thing to see our churches growing like that. But we just want to keep in mind what the traditions were, and to celebrate those traditions as well, and to have something in place to memorialize them as well.
Okay, Mr. Spain, we've just talked about some of the cultural practices that are still very important to Mvskoke churches. Now, does your program look into that? Does it blend in somehow in support or more active participation?
The NAGPRO doesn't really, my area doesn't really have anything to do with the churches or anything like that. It mainly, as I said, cultural items and human remains is the main focus on that. But I guess it could, because we have a program here at the Cultural Preservation Office where we have a crew that goes out, and that was part of their start. It was to go out and clean in cemeteries, but it started by us trying to document all these important cultural sites, such as cemeteries. So in doing that, we would go out and look at some of these cemeteries that were really bad shape. They were run down, overgrown and things. So And we would see people that would, Creek citizens would ask us, what are you guys doing? And we would tell them, they say, oh, we got a cemetery over here, a family cemetery, come clean ours.
Yeah.
And so we saw there was a need to do something, to help give something back to the citizens. So we started a little pilot program, was using contract labor at that time, go out and cleaning cemeteries at the same time we're documenting them. And we documenting them by using the global positioning system, GPS, and photographs and site sketches, and we tried to get all the information we can while we're out there at these sites. And it was very helpful, because a lot of them we probably never would have known where they were at, But, in doing that, we were able to give back to the people, by cleaning their cemeteries, and perhaps putting a fence around them if needed. But in putting a fence around it, some of them never had fences, or they were so old the fences were gone, and farmers or ranchers running cattle and horses and things out their livestock. And we put a fence around them, but a lot of them would say, well, I remember it being bigger. There was probably burials over here. So we would come out with our ground penetrating radar. We have a ground penetrating radar that we would come out, do GPS in those areas to try to find out if there are burials there, because we put a fence, we want to include them within the cemetery.
Now, when you say fence, you're talking about the whole cemetery, or just those little fences around?
Fences in the whole cemetery, to keep the cattle out from knocking over headstones or that type of thing.
Doing the things that cows do.
Yeah. So we come out and with our ground penetrating radar and see if we can locate additional burials, because we want to include them all in there. So that's kind of where that came from. And I guess if there are some out there, that they may, the landowner, may be so far away from the cemetery that the landowner says, no, that's not part of the cemetery or something. So we have to if it's federal land, we use NAGPRA, but if it's non-federal land, then we have to fall back on the state statutes, the Oklahoma state statutes, the ingress and egress law for people to go out and visit their family cemeteries, or prevent people, from basically tearing fences down. There's laws against, harming burial furniture or and possessing human remains or artifacts. So we fall back on state law in a lot of places, in a lot of instances.
It's amazing the effect that those kinds of things can have on you. Here. Let me digress for a second. When I was back in '78, I was a Ford Fellow in educational journalism, and then connected with National Public Radio, and they asked me to do a project on bones, Indian bones, and I said, okay. I poked around and found the right people in the right departments and things like that. And they said, come on over, we'll show you what we got. And I was expecting, a couple tables and trays, but I walked in there and there was this huge stack of drawers. Wow. And all of them were filled with bones. And you could, I don't know, Staheki is good, but I could certainly feel the energy there when I opened them up. And I wanted to, pray for them or whatever it was. I'm just a simple guy, and I just kind of wondered, where does that sort of thing fit into keeping our culture and traditions alive? I mean, Mr. Spain focuses on those things, but your project might not necessarily. But I get a feel for a religious aspect that transcends everything. Now, personally, do you all ever feel that kind of thing, or has it come into your heart, your mind, your work?
Well, for me, I was raised both in ceremonial grounds, around the ceremonial grounds, and raised at church. And I was always taught that Native Americans have always known that there's a spiritual realm. So whether you're going to the ceremonial grounds or attending church, they're both good ways. And I feel like our people, regardless of what they attend, they're sensitive people. We're always sensitive to these issues. It matters to us because we value our human life. We value our people. And I think all Native Americans value people when they're living, and then the value that they left to us in death, that their memory.
Does that energy enter into your work in documenting these churches?
For me, when my supervisor, Raylan Butler, and I sat down and started talking about this, I did, memories came flooding back in. My great uncle, Rolly Haynes, also pastored at Trenton, and I'm very sentimental when it comes to that church.
Mm-hmm.
My mom attended that church when she was little, and it was a school, so she attended school there. And so all of these memories come flooding back. But I feel like I am sensitive to our people, to the tragedies that we've gone through, to overcoming the tragedies, the historical trauma that we still try to overcome today. I feel a lot of that when I'm reading about a subject or when I'm looking into certain things, if I have a memory that's triggered by something that I've read. And of course, a lot of times I can hear Emin and the other group of people talk about meetings that they've gone to where they didn't feel like maybe somebody who was representing at that meeting didn't respect our culture, or maybe they didn't have enough knowledge of our culture and they misspoke. And I get passionate about those things because I think, and sometimes it becomes a heated passion, and I try to back away and not say anything out of anger.
Right. Yeah. I know that feeling, believe me, when I saw the Smithsonian thing and these workers there referring to this material as specimens, I think.
Yeah. These are people.
These are our people. You know. I really wanted to bark at them, but I couldn't. Mr. Spain, does this kind of a spiritual feeling work into the things that you do? I mean, you're right there next to the remains of our ancestors.
Yes, very, very much so. As you said, you could feel it just being in there, and out of respect, we don't really, my job, we have to view the remains and things and quite possibly handle them a lot of times. And I know there's a lot of taboos with people saying, we're not supposed to mess with these things, but, the alternative is our ancestors are going to sit on shelves, forever and be, scientific study, used for scientific study and those types of things. But, it's sad that we have to do this. Our people never expected us to have to do this, have to, go get our ancestors back from a museum basement or something and take them back and rebury them. I mean, that was just never, ever thought of. Yeah. We don't have any kind of ceremonies for it or anything like this. And the non-Indian people don't understand that. They think we have ceremonies for everything. And we have to explain that to them. And to them, they view them as objects, such as, artifacts
specimens,
or something. Yes, but to us, these were human beings that were buried by people that knew them and loved them, and knowing our culture, there was probably some kind of ceremony performed at that time. So the best we can do is repatriate them and rebury them as respectfully and as sensitively as we can. And personally, I always say a little prayer because I apologize for interrupting their journey, even though I didn't do it. But it's very, it can get very emotional about it, but I try not to. But like I said, a lot of people don't want to do this kind of work, but somebody has to. I want. We see them as our grandparents, as our families.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Now we have probably some people that maybe a caller right there is interested in more information on these subjects now. And how would someone get a hold of you? And then Emma?
Okay, well, again, we work for the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department. We're located in the Education Building on the Tribal Complex, and you could reach our receptionist at 918-732-7773. And she can put you in touch with either myself or Emin. And we're reaching out to anybody who is involved with churches, Native American churches, any churches with our Mvskoke citizenship involved. You can contact me directly at 918-732-7639, and we can set up a time to interview or do a phone interview.
Okay, great. And Emin, if someone has a question for you, what's the phone number?
918-732-7730.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming in. Yes, as I usually say, this looks like a subject we will be returning to at some point. And find out the progress of your project there.
All right.
82 churches.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. All right. Well, let me share some community announcements real quick, and we'll be out of here. We have, of course, an Indian taco sale coming up on February 1st at the Eufaula Indian Community Nutrition Center. Now, this is dine-in only, so $8, you get a nice-looking taco there. Glenpool NASA and Yuchi language programs are holding a stomp dance on February the 8th from 7 to 11 p.m. at 14901 South Warrior Road in Glenpool. There is craft tables and vendor space, so for more information, 322-9500. Extension 568. Summer Youth Employment Program. Kids, you might want to go to work, and or you might not want to go to work, but you don't get your paychecks for nothing. Well, I guess you do, but sometimes you have to work for them. You might want to apply now and get a hold of the folks there at the Youth MCN Youth Works, 732-7773. And, of course, VITA tax program. It's that time of the year, so you want to get ready to pay your taxes. Okay, Mvskoke History Symposium, March 20th and 21st in Okmulgee at the Mound Building. You want to save the date. We're talking about much of our history, things like different tribal history, the Civil War, Trail of Tears, and other things, hosted by the Historic and Cultural Preservation folks. 732-7733. Okay, that will wrap it up here for Mvskoke Radio this week. We appreciate you taking time, and we're going to look at the museum in Oklahoma City, the one I used to call the museum that won't die. So you all catch us next week. This is Gary Fife saying, Mado Mabu Hedget's good. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.